Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. So on Wednesday, I'm going to be back out at Commander's facility for another OTA session. Get to watch the veterans again with the rookies and just measure some progress, folks. It's always fun. There's only so much you can learn from these, but you can learn. And so it's always fun to watch them. One little note before I get started, the Commanders will have a joint practice against the Miami Dolphins before some point before the August 17th game in Miami. It's going to be a one-day practice. I don't know the date yet. I don't know that it's been set, but it will be a one-day practice. Certainly you would expect it either probably the 15th or so. Then there's also a chance that they do another one. And if they did, it most likely would be against, with the New York Jets before the first preseason game. And I think that would also be a one-day thing. That one is not for sure yet. Don't know if that's going to happen, but I think that I would just say there's a chance that they add another one. And if they did, that would be the week. So, we'll see what happens there, but I'm glad they're doing it because I think those are very informative for teams, especially with the new staff. And I think you go back a few years when Rivera took over and first of all, it's a pandemic. You didn't have that ability to do anything like that. So it made it tough, but I think they made so many mistakes on evaluating guys during camp in the first couple of years. Not so many, but enough. I guess some key ones, whether it was at quarterback, whether it was at safety, whether it was, not putting Landon Collins in position sooner. Although I think some of that was more convincing him. Bottom line is with these joint practices for a first-year staff, it can be a very invaluable tool. So anyways, that's what I know there. Now, let's get to what I want to talk about. And one of the things I want to talk about is Jayden Daniels. And I'm going to talk about some of the front office changes in a minute and just, a couple of ramblings on that. But with Jayden Daniels, one of the reasons why I think that he has a chance to be really good here is just because of the work he puts in. And I think you've already heard good things about him from inside the building, from, some of the teammates. There's a long way to go with that, especially with the veterans. Like, they're going to learn some things about him. It's really going to take into getting into training camp and being with him for a little while to see what he can really do. But I'll be curious to hear from some of them tomorrow after they've been around him for a week and a half or so, and just some of the things that they've learned about him right now. And I think that's one of the things you see, but he is a worker. And I think I've told you before, somebody's told me like he and his dad are like football nerds. This is a kid who's been studying football for a long time. And what I like about what he does is I think he puts the work in the right areas. I also don't think he's afraid of a challenge. And I think that's one of the things. Listen, I can look back on a lot of quarterbacks that have been through him. I've covered a lot of them, and nobody stuck around. What's the common denominator? And sometimes, like some of the guys who have been high picks who have failed, they're not putting in the right kind of work, or they're not putting in any work at all, or not enough work, right? And that was, that certainly you can apply to whoever you want to, because I'd say, yeah, it probably does. But with, certainly, I think Daniels is a little bit different in that regard. Not that he's I think Sam Howell put a lot of time. I think Kirk Cousins put a lot of time. I think Robert worked a lot on being in shape and doing all that stuff. And certainly he worked on quarterback stuff as well. However, I think there's some other stuff that separates guys from in the nitty gritty stuff that they do with the quarterback situation, the details that others have done certainly much more than what, back then. So, but I think Jayden does that. And I think he's a guy like he's got the growth mindset, it seems, based on what you hear. And I think he's open to trying to improve. And I go back to the virtual reality stuff at LSU, and you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this, a few times, but I do think it's indicative of somebody he wasn't the one who wanted LSU to go do this. They came to him and said, hey, we got this. We want to try it out, blah, blah. But he embraced it right away. And if you don't embrace it, if you fight it all, then it's not going to work for you. He made it work for him. And there was instant improvement. Like people down there will talk about the first game he tried I think it was Mississippi State, and just the difference they could see in him. Like even just watching him on film, you could see his head return to going through his progressions a little bit quicker than he had been previously. And they felt like it was because of that, but it's the work that he put in with that. He put in hundreds of extra hours just because of the VR stuff. And you can go back to his record-setting game against Florida, where he set an SEC record with over 600 yards of total offense for a quarterback. Well, he did that the week after he entered he had been in concussion protocol that week. And there was no practice time for him, or very little, if I remember, but he did do the VR stuff. He spent time doing that, and that enabled him to stay sharp and go do that. If you're not doing those kind of things, then you're not going to have the kind of season he had. And that's why, like, if you talk to people down there and, people said, oh, he's a one-year wonder, they laugh at that, because that's not how they view him at all, because they saw the work he put in. And I think that's what resonated with Washington so much throughout the process, is that work that he put in, because if you don't have that, you can have the talent, but it's not going to go well if you're not putting in the work. It just won't. I don't care how fast you are. I don't care how well you throw. You might make plays, but you're not going to be a consistent quarterback. And I think that's what this kid wants to be. And to be honest, and, even when like Dwayne was here, and I don't like to speak ill of Dwayne because of what happened to him, obviously. And I knew him, and it's horrible, but just from a football standpoint, as a rookie, I don't think he ever quite got the responsibilities of his position, what he needed to do in terms of the work he had to put in, but also, like, he would talk about, he wanted to be a Hall of Famer. Well, guys who are Hall of Famers don't talk about it. They are about it. And I think that's one thing you see with Jaden, that I think he's got some maturity with him in that regard, that I think, just saying that he wants to earn a spot and he wants to, play his role. He's not coming here to save the franchise or the city. And I think that makes a difference, because if you're coming there with a different mindset, then you're looking at yourself differently than others. I don't think that's what he does. I don't think he's going to be sitting there palling around with the owner, for sure, because I don't think the owner's like that. And I don't think the players like that. So I think those are all good things. That's why I think, like, this time, I think there's a difference with him compared to some of the other hopes that have been here in the past. He just has to go out and produce. But I think in some of those key areas, I think you can already see some of those differences. Now we just have to see, again, you always have to say, qualify, like, I don't want to sit here and make people think, oh my God, he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't know that yet, but I do like everything we've seen to this point. And I think everything you've seen to this point points in the right direction for sure. And then it's just a matter of, when do you get it? So, that's do you learn to avoid those big hits, because that's what will get him in trouble in the NFL. He knows it, but they know it very well. So, if he does that, then it could be a long, fun career, and we'll see. But, it's funny, because that's, like, even last year though, Sam Howell did a lot of these things too. Sam Howell is a very smart guy. And, I always felt like I would talk about this. I felt like he had a shot to be good because of those same qualities. Like, he's a worker. He's very smart. He does, he doesn't, same thing you hear about Jane, like, you don't have to teach him twice. Same thing with Howell, but the organization didn't help him. And that's another difference for this team with this kid, compared to especially how, like, if you had to drop, like, what are the things you need to do to help a young quarterback? They pretty much did the opposite. You do not throw the ball that many times. I know they try to say that it would help his development as a passer. Well, it didn't, because it kept putting him in bad spots, and it put the line in bad spots. And the line was not good enough to be put in that many situations. You have a line that wasn't pass blocking well, and you asked him to pass block a lot. It's not very smart. And you had a quarterback who needed help, who needed more developing as a passer to read the defenses, but yet you could put him in the spots. It wasn't going to accelerate just because you had him do it a ton. You have to put him in the right situations, and then he can help himself. But it was just a mishmash, just a lot of errors. I don't think they're going to do that here. And I think if you combine the work with all that, and then the support staff around him, that's what gives you a shot to have really good success. And I still think Howell's going to can have a good career in this league. I think he can play in this league. I think if they were drafted 12th or 13th, I'm not drafting Bo Nix instead of getting rid of Howell. Not a chance. A 2 with Jaden Daniels, yes, higher ceiling. Get that. But I don't think that, but the point of me talking about this is that I've seen guys who work like that, but he just didn't have the support system around him to help him succeed that I think Daniels has in Washington. So that bodes well for him and for the franchise. So anyway, last thing I want to talk about is, it's funny because there have been some scouts that have been leaving, and I see some comments about how like, oh, good riddance to them because like they this organization is terrible, blah, blah. But I think it'd be incorrect to just blame things on the scouts, just knowing how it had operated here and what people were saying and how much different it is under Adam Peters, that to sit there and think that some of these scouts were just terrible. I don't know that we necessarily know that because their voices weren't always heard. So I think that's one of the biggest things I would hear is that, God bless, the setup is so much better now. But when if scouts' voices aren't heard, it's kind of hard to blame them for the failures of the organization. Now, if you're Adam Peters, you're bringing in your guys, you're bringing in scouts that maybe you've had your eye on, they've done well for other teams. That's a natural thing to happen. I don't blame it at all. But I'm not sitting here and assuming that like Connor Behringer, who left the organization or wasn't renewed, that he is somehow not a good scout. Harrison Richter, he left. Are they bad scouts? I don't know that. I know it wasn't a great front office, but the sort of the scouts, like you can't assume that because I don't think they had necessarily a fair shot here. And that goes back years. So, but especially the last couple of years, when you have a coach centric setup, and then you have a coach who really needed others to help him with that, and you had a coach going through cancer, it was not conducive to success. Like, he's taking his time away, then you're relying on guys there who maybe shouldn't be in some of those roles or weren't as good, or maybe aren't listening to other people as much, that it just makes it difficult. So I think the way they have it set up now is if they succeed, it's not necessarily going to be because they change some scouts. It's because they have a system that's more conducive to success, because they'll listen more to the scouts perhaps. And I think, that's what I've heard over the last years, but wasn't just the last 4 years that was the case. And then it would depend on who's in charge. And I've told you before, like the front office, when Bruce was here and, even Jay's years, like there'd be, Bruce and Dan might want some free agent because, oh, we need speed, so let's go get Paul Richardson. The coach say, we don't want him. They would, bring in Zach Brown. Coaches didn't want him, but they didn't listen to them. And then they'd resign some of these guys that the coaches didn't want. It was crazy. And even the last couple of years, like you have a guy now in Adam Peters who's clearly in charge. Now you're setting up the rows underneath. He's bringing in guys that he can trust, that can help him and do what he needs to do. And it's just so much different than it was before. And even people who are leaving here, who are either not being retained or were, just let go, like what's going on here. I mean, I've heard that from them, and it's because they feel like there's a better setup to have people's voices heard, and also to get all the information and listen to the people who are collecting that information. Not that the scouts know everything, because sometimes the coach got to know that's what a GM is there for, to maybe break some of those ties, or just make the decision. But I think Peters is going to be much better at that. Like, I don't think Rivera, certainly in hindsight, would have wanted to have that coach-centric position, not realizing. And in hindsight, it was even at the time, I remember talking to somebody who was a high-powered agent, but a lot of guys are like, I wouldn't have my clients take that kind of a situation because you can't have success. Very few can have success in that situation. And I think we saw it. So that's my whole point in bringing this up, is saying that just because some of these scouts are changing doesn't necessarily mean that they were bad scouts leaving. It's just that I think if there's success in the future, it's because it's set up so much better from top to here, to here, to here. So anyway, that's my little spiel. I'll be back again after the OTA practice. We'll get another podcast out Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.